Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness. And y'all, we are in the midst of committee season in the Texas legislature, and the bills are coming at us in a hurry. I hope you're all signed up for Texas Impact's emails and a rapid response team so you can receive the weekly action alert and updates, because your voice is needed now more than ever. One of the issues that's hot from a federal level to the state level and even in our local communities is immigration. We usually think of immigration as a federal issue, but the state of Texas has been encroaching into this space for years, and we definitely have to pay attention to what's moving in Austin. And so Texas Impact recently launched our Immigration Action Team, and this week we are bringing you 3 speakers to help bring us all up to speed. First up, we talked with Bobby Painter, managing attorney with the Texas Immigration Law Council, followed by his colleague Kristin Etter, who serves as the Director of Policy and Legal Services. They'll talk with us about the current immigration realities here in Texas and throughout the country, and then we'll welcome Texas Impact's Bobby Watson to make the immigration connection with the Texas legislature. As always, we hope you'll check out the Action Center to consider how you can get involved and raise your voice. If you have questions about any of it, hit me up at scott@texasimpact.org. But for now, I hope you enjoy this week's conversations with Bobby Painter, Kristin Etter, and Bobby Watson. Joining us for this week's conversation is Bobby Painter, managing attorney with the Texas Immigration Law Council. Bobby, you have worked with the Texas Immigration Law Council. Talk to us about what that is and how you came to be there.
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. The Texas Immigration Law Council is a relatively new nonprofit here in Texas. We were just founded in 2023, and our aim is to serve as a statewide resource hub for other nonprofit organizations operating in the immigration space. So we aim to make connections, develop and share resources, and provide technical assistance and training and support wherever it might be useful in a nonpartisan way that ultimately supports the rights of all immigrants and refugees throughout the state and also the people who support them.
Our listeners love kind of the why question. So why'd you decide to start doing this work? Why do you feel called to it?
I started being interested in this work a long time ago as a college student, actually. I was interning, doing a summer internship at a nonprofit organization in another state that had a department that worked directly with refugees and asylum seekers. And through that work, I got to know a lot of people who came from all over the world who were trying to build a better life here in the U.S. And I don't come from an immigrant background recently myself. My family's been in the U.S. for a long time. But I found their stories to be fascinating and really inspiring. And it seemed to me that the work was not only important just for promoting human rights and promoting human dignity, but also deeply patriotic, as you're helping to ensure that we live up to our ideals as a country and that we're making sure that our economy, our workforce, our society remains vibrant by bringing in people who have a range of experiences and who are highly, highly motivated to build better lives for themselves and for others here in the U.S.
I love that and really appreciate the work you've been doing over the years. I think there are a lot of people who are right now trying to figure out what's real. Right?
Sure.
Like, what is the real immigration situation? So if you could talk to us about what's the real immigration situation here in Texas? For example, do most migrants come across the southern border? What's the current reality of immigration in Texas?
Sure. Well, migrants come to Texas in all sorts of different ways. And certainly the southern border is a big one, simply because we have a very long border with Mexico. It is the way that a lot of people who are coming to the U.S. to seek safety first come into contact with the immigration system. But the border is also a major driver of our state's economy through commerce between the U.S. and Mexico and Central America. But I think you raise an important point, which is that people don't just migrate to Texas by showing up at a point of entry and requesting asylum. There are a whole host of ways that somebody might immigrate to the U.S. and end up resettling in Texas.
Talk to us about those different kinds of migrants. What different categories are we looking at?
Right. So the clearest way to break this down is there are kind of three main ways that you might be able to immigrate to the U.S. The first is humanitarian, and that gets a lot of attention in the news because there's a lot of focus these days on asylum seekers. And that's one way that you might migrate to the U.S. You either resettle here as a refugee, you come to the border and you request asylum, or maybe you obtain status by because you're a victim of human trafficking or other types of crimes and are eligible for specific types of visas. That's one. The other big basket is family. There are people who are able to migrate to the U.S. because they have family members here who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents who then file a petition for them, and then they go through a lengthy process involving several federal agencies whereby they might ultimately be able to come to the U.S. on an immigrant visa, which means essentially they get a green card and are able to stay here permanently. And then the last batch is employment-based immigration. Our immigration system has a huge number of different types of visas available to different types of workers to come and live in the work temporarily and sometimes permanently. And they focus on areas like the tech industry and high-skilled workers, maybe seasonal agricultural workers, professional athletes, musicians, university professors, business owners. There's a whole range of visas available that might allow somebody to migrate to the country and to this region to work and live.
Has Texas's profile changed over time in terms of how many are coming from each category, or has it been relatively consistent?
I would say that there's been some change, and there are two areas that kind of pop out in my head specifically. One is I was just looking at the numbers recently, and Texas, for a lot of the past 2 decades, has seen a growing number of refugees resettle to the state, either directly, meaning that they were flown here to begin life in the U.S. here in Texas, or that migrated to Texas in search of employment and better living opportunities after being resettled to some other state. So I think that the number of refugees being resettled to the area has the medium-term trend has been rising. And then similarly, we're seeing our economy change. Certainly agriculture, construction remain major sectors of the economy in this state, but we are seeing a growing tech industry and more demand for high-skilled workers from abroad to come and fill those vacancies as well. So overall, I think the diversification of the state's economy is reflected in the growing diversity of immigrants in terms of where they come from and how they come.
I feel like a lot of times when I watch the news or hear elected officials speak, those different groups of humans, those different groups of migrants are all lumped in together. Are some more at risk than others in this current administration?
That's a great question. And I think the short answer is yes. We've certainly seen over the past few weeks in some of the executive orders and policy changes that have come down at the federal level that certain cohorts are being targeted more than others. Refugees are the first example that comes to mind. One of the executive orders signed on January 20th essentially indefinitely suspended the refugee resettlement program that our State Department manages, meaning that people who historically would be thoroughly vetted abroad and then allowed to resettle to the U.S., that program has ended. They're not coming anymore. And some of the benefits and support that was available to those who already had resettled in the U.S. has been cut off as well. So that is certainly one area of individuals, of immigrants, that is particularly vulnerable right now. Beyond that, I think individuals who are here on kind of more tenuous types of status, provisional statuses, DACA, people who have pending visa applications, people who are maybe admitted into the U.S. temporarily with the intention that they apply for some other type of status. Those are all individuals who have been explicitly targeted by some of the executive orders we've seen come down over the past month. And then lastly, the undocumented population as a whole has certainly been the focus of a lot of very intense rhetoric. They'll continue to be the focus of increased immigration enforcement, and probably see their rights and the lawful pathways that might exist for them to obtain permanent status in the U.S. significantly restricted.
I feel like a lot of listeners have been trying to pay attention to what's coming out of this administration, what's coming out of D.C., but it's like we're drinking out of a fire hose every day. So talk to us about the consequences of the Trump administration's initiatives related to immigration. What are you most concerned about?
I think there are two major concerns that come to mind for me. The first is just the humanitarian concern, is immigration enforcement when it's not carried out with consideration for the families and the individuals and the way it impacts more than just the person who's targeted. That's a big concern for me. We're not just talking about arresting people with criminal histories and deporting them. We're potentially talking about arresting people who've built their entire lives here in the U.S. And while they may not have status, their family members certainly do. And you're really talking about severing family relationships and separating families potentially forever if policies aren't carried out in a humane way. Beyond that, there are pretty significant implications for the state's economy. It's still early days. We haven't really seen massive shifts yet, but the tone of the incoming administration certainly makes it feel like we're going to see a lot more of this. But immigrants really provide a major source of labor for several sectors of the state economy. I think 50% of the construction sector, for example, is made up of undocumented immigrants. But there are other sectors as well, oil and gas, agriculture, healthcare, that rely heavily on immigrant labor, both documented and undocumented. And if all of a sudden that labor force feels under threat and feels like it has to stay home or move elsewhere to find opportunities where they feel safer, that could have significant impacts on the state economy as a whole and really undermine a lot of the dynamism we've seen in the state economy over the past several decades.
Do you hear a lot of folks who are addressing it from that perspective about the impact that it'll have on the economy?
I do. Our organization talks to a wide range of stakeholders, members of the immigrant community, but also members of the religious community or the business community. And I've certainly heard concerns from folks in the construction sector and the agricultural sector about what impact extremely aggressive immigration policies will have on their ability to access the workers they need to get their jobs done.
Yeah, and I know church folks also care about the economy, but I was just in a room full of United Methodist clergy who were asking a bunch of questions about this topic. And, we all know somebody who is worried about family members, who's worried about friends, who's worried about people in their congregation. I coach a soccer team and have players who are worried about, who say grandma's not coming to the games because they're afraid, there might be law enforcement around. So there are certainly people who are scared. And I think a lot of congregations and people of faith are trying to figure out what they do about that. So what advice do you have? What do you wish Texas faith communities, what do you wish listeners would do about this?
Well, I think you nailed it. It's one thing to be able to have command of all the facts or statistics around immigration, and there are some audiences that might find that to be a compelling basis for argument. But really, I think the way we start to move the needle on this issue, to get toward a more just, fair, humane immigration system, is to focus on personal storytelling. As you said, pretty much everybody has a personal connection to immigration or an immigrant family or individual, and trying to use that personal connection, the stories they know about that person and their family, to draw a line between kind of obscure federal policies and rhetoric and the actual impacted people is something that anyone can do. And just going out, talking to their neighbors, talking to their friends, sharing stories at church or during other kinds of community gatherings is a way to help people realize that this issue isn't as abstract and far away as it's sometimes presented, that it's really a community issue that affects all of us.
I really like that advice about telling stories to your neighbors and, your Sunday school classes and other groups where you are involved. Any advice for us in terms of contacting legislators or members of Congress? Any call to action there right now?
I think the same advice stands, is if you can personalize immigration policies as much as possible, that this isn't just about, fighting some obscure imaginary, to use the administration's terminology, criminal alien. This is about our friends and our neighbors and about the feeling safe in our communities and making sure that our tax base is strong and that people trust law enforcement, that they feel safe contacting law enforcement if there's a problem, a real threat to public safety. that is really the messaging that I think will compel lawmakers more than just throwing statistics at them.
All right. Anything else that I should have asked you today, since you are the expert?
You covered a lot of the broad strokes. I think that's the main thing. We're still in early days, so we'll see if there's other issues that present themselves. But I think you really touched on the main theme, which is that immigration is a far more complex and local and personal subject than is often presented in the media.
All right. Well, Bobby, we really appreciate the time. I will give you a chance here before we close out. If there are any other closing thoughts or shameless plugs you'd like to make today, anywhere we can find more information?
Sure. You can always check out our website. It's www.txilc.org. We have a really robust set of community resources in English and Spanish about all sorts of emerging issues in the immigration space, and we're adding new stuff all the time. We also have a really active Instagram. So if you want really simplified explainers of brand new immigration issues that are coming out, check us out there as well.
All right. Bobby Painter, really appreciate the time this week. Thanks for your work. And we'll be rooting you on and wishing you well from afar, but hope folks will be making all of those conversations happen over the course of the next few weeks. It is an important time. So thanks again for the time today.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, friends, we are excited to be welcomed this week by Kristin Etter, Director of Policy and Legal Services at the Texas Immigration Law Council. Kristin, thanks for rejoining us on the program today.
Yeah, good morning. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, we always love the conversation, and immigration is one of those topics that we typically think of as a federal issue, and we try to focus on state policy here on this podcast. But immigration drives so much of what happens in Texas, in our communities, in the legislature. So, talk to us to start off today about why this issue is so resonant and so important here in Texas.
Yeah, well, first of all, just the basics. Texas is a land of immigrants. Immigrants have been part of our state even before Texas was a state or even a republic for that matter. And we're a land of immigrants, and it's really been one of the hallmarks and one of the things that's made Texas great is just the number of immigrants, all different types of immigrants, visa holders, DACA recipients, dreamers, high-skilled, low-skilled workers. It's just comprised of lots of different people from lots of different places in our world. And Texas, again, is a state that is one of the most prosperous states in the nation because of our high levels of immigration.
Yeah, and it really does drive the Texas economy, right? What kind of impact does migration have in Texas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all it takes is just walking down any Texas street, and you look around and you see who's working, who's building our roads, who's building our buildings, who is the visible worker that you see when you're driving down the street. Immigrants obviously work in all sectors. Immigrants really are the backbone of many different sectors of our economy, construction, agriculture, tech industry. And so, yeah, it's just one of the reasons that Texas is such a great state to live and also such a prosperous state.
We've seen a lot in the news, obviously, about federal immigration crackdowns and what's happening in D.C., but that's also been happening here in Texas as well, right?
Oh, yes. We've actually had our own state-level immigration enforcement policy since 2021. And 2021 was the year that our governor declared a disaster under the Operation Lone Star. Many of your listeners may have heard of that, but it's essentially been in effect since 2021, and it's a series of policies that have come about from our governor based on this disaster declaration, where essentially they have criminalized immigration in Texas and have militarized the border through a series of different measures that many of the listeners might be familiar with, such as the building of a border wall, the installation of razor buoys in the Rio Grande, and the construction of miles and miles of concertina wire along the Texas-Mexico border.
You are an attorney. And so when most of us lay people hear things like due process, we think, that's probably important, but we don't give it too much thought. I bet you're thinking about this all the time. And I know that you have concerns over due process in terms of our current practices at the border. So talk to us about that. Help a lay audience understand what's happening and why we should be concerned.
Yeah. So due process is the hallmark of our legal system in the United States. And it's one that I have seen firsthand how it's really been turned on its head at the border. And let me explain. So in my prior role as a lawyer at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, we represented thousands of migrants that had been arrested under the Operation Lone Star program. And let me tell the listeners a little bit about what those arrests were and how they came about. So essentially, you had a system where the border has been closed to almost all immigrants for quite some time. And so the only way to come across primarily either the ports of entry, like I said, had been closed. And so you saw a system where people were seeking to turn themselves in to cross, and many of them were here seeking asylum. Many more were here coming to jobs that they had lined up, coming to reunite with family. But you essentially had a system where at the Texas-Mexico border, Texas National Guard and Texas Department of Public Safety officers who had been deployed by the thousands under Operation Lone Star would essentially direct migrants to certain locations on private property solely to be arrested for a state-level misdemeanor criminal trespass charge. And I saw that firsthand, not just in my travels and time spent at the border, but also watching countless hours, hundreds of people that had been arrested in this manner. We saw time and again, people were asking to present to Border Patrol. Texas National Guard or DPS officers would tell them they had to walk to certain locations. Sometimes when I was there visiting, and it was in the month of July, it was over 100 degrees. Migrants were being told they had to travel 3 miles downriver to turn themselves into Border Patrol, only to then be arrested by state-level officials for criminal trespass. So again, many of our clients were directed to certain locations on private property to then just be arrested. After the arrest, they were put in buses and bussed hours from the border and were placed into prisons that had been cleared out. These were Texas State Department of Criminal Justice prisons that had been cleared out and repurposed to house migrants under the criminal trespass Operation Lone Star program. And so people were put in these very harsh conditions, in conditions of confinement that would lead them to plead guilty to a crime that they were innocent of, only as their only means of getting out of these harsh prison conditions. And so it is a true system that lacks due process at every level, really based on like the initial arrest. Like I said, most of our clients were innocent of these charges. They were either directed to certain locations by law enforcement, or they were not guilty of the actual crime of criminal trespass, which requires that notice be given that entry was forbidden. For example, many of our clients never had that notice. And again, state criminal trespass was never designed, that statute was never designed to enforce immigration law. So it was essentially like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Criminal trespass was never designed to do this. And for that reason, many of our clients, if not the vast majority, were innocent, yet would plead guilty to a crime they were innocent of solely to get out of prison.
Wow. So there are certainly concerns on due process grounds at the border, but there are also people living throughout the state of Texas and throughout the country who are concerned about immigration crackdowns of all types. So I know there are a lot of groups that are doing Know Your Rights trainings, but for our audience today, what should people know?
Yeah, well, when everybody is educated about their rights and responsibilities under the law, that is what can make our communities, and that can make both law enforcement as well as community members that impact with law enforcement safer. And so the important thing to note about this is that constitutional rights apply to everyone that is on U.S. soil, regardless of immigration status. And so when people are knowledgeable about what their rights and responsibilities are, again, this is a way that we can keep people safe. And so there really are three primary constitutional rights that come into play whenever there are encounters with government officials. The first is the Fourth Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment protects everyone, again, regardless of immigration status, from unreasonable searches and seizures. And so what that means is that nobody has to allow government officials into their home or private spaces. Nobody has to consent to a search of their person, their place, or their belongings without a search warrant, a signed judicial search warrant by a judge. The second important constitutional right is the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. And this right is a right that kicks in anytime anybody is being questioned by a government official. And it's a right that can be easily invoked simply by saying, I want to remain silent and I'm requesting to speak with a lawyer. In Texas, the only information anybody ever has to provide a law enforcement officer is their name, their date of birth, and their residence address if they're under lawful arrest. And that is to avoid an additional potential criminal charge of failure to identify. But note that this information, nothing has to do with providing details about immigration status, about where a person was born or where they're from, or about how they entered the state of Texas. So the right to remain silent is very important. The Sixth Amendment right, which is the third constitutional right that's very important for everyone to know, is the right to have an attorney. And the Sixth Amendment, again, it's the right to have an attorney, the right to be able to have an attorney be appointed to represent you in a criminal case if you don't have the ability to afford an attorney. And so that is, again, a Sixth Amendment right applies to everyone, regardless of citizenship status, if they are accused of a crime that could potentially result in any jail time.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I know there are a lot of groups that are providing those trainings or referring people to other groups who are doing trainings. We have people of faith from throughout Texas who are listening to this. We'll have faith leaders trying to figure out what their congregation can do. But Kristin, you've been hearing it all over, I'm sure. Like, people are scared. People are trying to figure out how they can support their neighbors who are scared. What do you hope people will do? What's your homework assignment for people as we try to figure out how we can be supportive of our neighbors?
Yeah, well, this is a time of concern for everyone, immigrant and non-immigrant. And that is because law enforcement that turns into immigration enforcement in our state essentially has the potential of really breaking down trust and safety in our community. And so I would suggest, again, that people become educated about what the laws are, what their rights are. Knowledge is power. And a lot of this information is important to get because we want people to have timely and accurate information and to not be driven by fear and misinformation. And so it's really about how we can support each other, how people in community can support all members of their community, and how we can get this basic knowledge and information out to everyone. Because again, being educated about what your rights and responsibilities are under the law is important for immigrants and non-immigrants alike, just to keep our communities safe, to keep the level of community trust up, and also to be there to support everyone in our communities, families, community members. You know, in Texas, we have a lot of mixed status families that are clearly very concerned about being separated from children. And so really taking the time to make sure everybody understands what their rights are, making sure schools understand what their rights are, making sure people that work in our healthcare hospitals, for example, understand what their rights are, and making sure that people can continue to access services that they need to, whether that be at the hospital, whether that be going to community-based organizations, whether that be going, attending school, and understanding that, again, nobody has to divulge any information about their immigration status.
Education is really important. I'm going to give you a chance to make some shameless plugs here at the end. Where can people go to get more information if they want good information?
So we have a lot of up-to-date resources and explainers on our website. It's www.txilc.org, and go to the Resources Center. We are constantly updating that as we see new state and federal executive actions and different policies that impact immigration. We are constantly analyzing and providing explainers that help to explain in non-legal terms how these new policies impact people in our state. So I would encourage folks to go to our website. In addition, we also have a monthly newsletter. And if you go to our website, you can sign up to be on our newsletter. And that also is a good way to stay informed about what's going on. We have a lot of different educational resources. We do a lot of presentations in the community, a lot of different webinars for various groups. And so in our newsletter, we always highlight up and coming events, opportunities, and resources. So I would encourage listeners to go to our website and sign up for the newsletter and download our resources that we have available in multiple different languages.
Kristin Etter, you are doing incredible work. I know you're busy, but we appreciate you and know that that our listeners and folks throughout the state of Texas are grateful for the work you're doing. So thanks.
Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks so much. And I hope everyone stays well, takes care of themselves, and takes care of their communities. So thanks so much.
Joining us again this week is Texas Impact's policy advocate, Bobby Watson, who works on a very wide range of issues, one of them being immigration. Bobby, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me again.
All right, Bobby, we just talked to Kristin. We talked to Bobby, the other Bobby, and a lot of the focus of immigration is clearly at the federal level. But one of the things we like to keep people focused on is the work that's taking place in the Texas Capitol. So talk to us about that nexus. Immigration is also an issue that is live in the Texas legislative session, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you talked to Kristin and Bobby because they are super smart and have a lot of really good information and insider knowledge on what's going on the federal level. What I say is interesting this year at the Texas Ledge is that because so much is going on at the federal level, what is happening at the Texas Ledge is different than what was going on last session. There's way less energy, still some, in terms of militarization and focusing on that type of strict enforcement of immigration at the state level because there's the perception that the federal government is handling it in a way that the Texas Ledge wants. Something I think that we're focusing more on this session, and there's a lot of energy around, is there's a number of bills that are trying to limit or remove undocumented folks' ability to access public services, specifically in education and also some in healthcare. So that is something we're watching. There's a few bills that are trying to remove undocumented folks' ability to classify themselves as residents of Texas if they've been to high school here, so that they can't get into in-state tuition, which is something Texas has done for a while. There's a bill trying to take undocumented kids out of public schools, which, we're super not for. And then some that are trying to ask healthcare providers and hospitals to ask immigrants or ask any patient their immigration status, which in order to track that, which our concern with that is that would lead to a chilling effect and immigrant communities that are already kind of experiencing a lot of fear right now to not go and seek healthcare that they need.
I remember some of these debates from over the course of the years, and certainly we've had the conversation since I've been at Texas Impact about students being able to access public education regardless of their documentation status. Like, these haven't been like liberal ideas, right? Like, these are the folks who implemented these policies over the course of the last few decades would be described by most as conservatives, right? This shouldn't be a partisan issue that we're taking care of kids in our communities.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think that we're seeing that more so in the public school debate. That's only one bill I know of that's trying to remove kids from public schools. And I'm not sure it's going to have a lot of traction. And also there's some issues there with constitutionality that I'm pretty sure Kristin has talked a bit about. But there is this effort right now in terms of, that's kind of, I think, in line with this, with like DOGE and the federal level of trying to cut costs. And one of the ways I think that some people at the ledge are trying to do that is by eliminating any tax dollars that they think are being spent on non-legal residents, especially in higher education. We think that's problematic and that everyone should be able to access education. We know that these people are part of our communities, but I think that's of what some of that, the ideology behind the bills that are happening right now.
We'll certainly be keeping folks up to date on what these bills are doing through our weekly action alerts. And I know we have our new immigration team that's up and running to help people stay up to date and get involved. But is there anything besides signing up for all the Texas Impact stuff that people should be doing right now? Any calls, any conversations that folks should be making with their representatives?
I think one thing that we're encouraging people on our immigration team to do, and one thing we think everyone should do, is talk to local law enforcement in their communities and also local officials and see, there's so much uncertainty around immigration right now and so much uncertainty for those families. And we know that some people aren't going to schools, some immigrant families aren't going to schools, some aren't seeking health care, some are avoiding any attention. And so trying to talk to your local communities to make sure that families aren't getting left behind, that we're still actively trying to support everyone in our communities. That's helpful. Talking to your sheriffs and local officials, that is a good thing to be doing right now to just engage your community and try and give support where you can.
Yeah, talk to me about those conversations, because I know we've said lots of times you should be talking to local law enforcement, but what's that conversation look like?
Yeah, so one thing people can talk about with their local law enforcement is whether or not they are involved with enforcing immigration law or where they stand on that. There's a debate going on right now about trying to get local law enforcement involved with agreements called 287Gs, which essentially allow them to be deputized by federal agencies that enact immigration enforcement, like ICE and CBP. And as long as they're supervised by someone from one of those agencies, they can help process immigrants. And so asking them if that's something that they are considering, if that is a priority for them, or if they're just going to be focusing on public safety. And just kind of seeing where they land on that is really helpful information for you to know what's going on in your community.
All right, Bobby, I'm going to give you a softball here. Make your pitch for people to join the Texas Impact's immigration team.
Come join us. We meet at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesdays, and we have a really, really well-informed, robust group of people who are community or mobilizers who have been involved in immigration and know a lot more than just our staff here, who are trying to exchange information with each other about what's going on. And it's a great way, immigration's a scary issue right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of concern for our neighbors. And this is a place where we're trying to share resources with each other about how we can support our neighbors in so much uncertainty and so much change. So come there, learn from what's going on in other people's communities, and hear about what we're doing at the Ledge.
And if you can't make the meeting, you should go ahead and sign up anyway, because you send the notes out, right?
That's true. We send out the notes, and also go ahead and plug our rapid response so you can know what bills we're doing.
All right, Bobby Watson, I know it's a busy time for you. Really appreciate your work and for taking the time today.
Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed this week's conversations with Bobby, Kristin, and Bobby. And y'all, as we think about the immigration issues, we all know people who are scared about what's happening with immigration enforcement. So I hope we respond with the energy this issue area requires. Consider joining the Immigration Action Team. Think about how you can help increase awareness of legal rights. Talk with your elected representatives at every level of government. Again, we'll be updating our action alerts with the bills that we talked about today as they begin to move. So check out the Action Center every Monday, or sign up for the Rapid Response Team to get those emailed directly to you. Y'all, we need a movement of Texans of faith willing to speak up for our migrant neighbors and on all of the other issues that we're working on this session. So sign up today and invite a friend to do the same. This work is a lot more fun when we do it together. If you have questions about any of it, please reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. While you're on the website, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.